Greetings and welcome to episode 8 of Australia-China Media Watch. This week, we'll be looking at articles published in the Global Times as well as Sky News Australia from Monday, 3rd of January through to Sunday, the 9th of January. During this time, there were 21 instances of Australia being mentioned in the Global Times. In terms of Sky News Australia, during the course of the week, there were 9 articles that were published, and I'm not sure what happened the last time around, because in episode 7, when I was looking at articles published from 27th to the 2nd of January, so 27th of December to the 2nd of January, they did not quite show up in the search engine via Sky News Australia. So it looks like there were at least 2 articles that were published from the week of 27th December to 2nd of January, which means I've got to revisit the tally for last week, which was originally 21 instances from the Global Times versus 0 from Sky News Australia. That number will now be revised to 21 mentions from the Global Times and 2 mentions from Sky News Australia. Let's start by unpacking the Global Times. Published on the 4th of January in the column Viewpoint by the author Wei Dongxu, published on January 4th, 2022 at 6:38 p.m. The headline reads, Joint Statement by P5 Countries Restrains AUKUS Practices. The opening paragraph, leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states, namely China, France, Russia, the UK and the US on Monday, issued a joint statement on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races. This is the first time for leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states to issue such a statement. Mentions of Australia appear the first time in the following paragraph. The risks of nuclear proliferation still exist across the world. For example, the US, UK and Australia in September 2021 announced the formation of an enhanced trilateral security partnership called AUKUS, which will support Canberra in acquiring nuclear-powered submarines and enable nuclear-powered submarines to patrol the Indo-Pacific region. Some analysts say that they were touching the bottom line of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. The next instance of Australia being mentioned comes in the following paragraph. If the US breaks through certain contents or principles in this statement, it will face more queries and criticisms. In the future, Washington's arms sales will encounter increasing restraint and supervision from the other 4 P5 members. Corresponding supervision mechanisms will limit the US and the UK in providing Australia with nuclear-powered submarine technology. Against this backdrop, it remains to be seen whether Canberra can acquire nuclear-powered submarines or what kinds of limitations will be set for putting the submarines into use. No other mentions of Australia is found in this article. And in terms of an overall look at the tone of the publication, I think that definitely falls on the negative spectrum. We'll keep going to the next piece. This next article was published on the 4th of January as well, at 5:54 p.m. in the section Economy. The headline reads, Effective implementation of RCEP a major win for multilateralism and free trade, according to Foreign Minister. The opening paragraph reads, The effective implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is a major victory for multilateralism and free trade, a spokesperson for China's Foreign Ministry said on Tuesday. We must tear down walls instead of building barriers, open up instead of isolation, and integrate instead of decoupling. This is the common voice of all our CEP members on solving global economic governance issues, Wang Wenbin, the spokesperson, said at a press briefing. Having a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like it appears twice. The first time it shows up comes in the following paragraph. The agreement came into effect across the first group of 10 countries, 6 ASEAN members in addition to China, Japan, New Zealand and Australia. The RCEP covers a market of 2.2 billion people with a combined economic size of $26.2 trillion or 30% of the world's GDP. With the formal entry of RCEP, the proportion of zero tariff products between China and ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, and other member countries has increased significantly and is moving towards the goal of achieving zero tariffs for more than 90% of the trade in goods, the spokesperson said. An overall sense of the article gives a somewhat positive representation of Australia, and to summarize the paper, it can be said that this paper was talking about the effective implementation of RCEP, could be read as a major victory for multilateralism and free trade, and that's according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So coming into effect across the first group of 10 countries, 6 ASEAN members, in addition to China, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. Moving along to the next article. This was published on the 4th of January as well. And the headline reads, Solomons and Battle Between Superpowers. This is published from the Viewpoint section of the Global Times. The opening paragraph reads, this essay discusses the issues that have stirred up hostility between the superpowers. It begins with an outline emphasizing the sensitivity pertaining to the presence of China in the Solomon Islands, whilst arguing that the interests of Western powers in undermining their presence is discernible in their eagerness to quote-unquote develop the Maelita province. The strands of the core issue are connected through broad themes. The thesis of the article is that Western nations are scurrying to start a war with the PRC rather than the other way around. A battle in this geopolitical war has recently raised its ugly head in the Solomon Islands. The essay concludes with the assertion that the Solomons has become a hotspot in the war between the United States and its allies versus China and its partner Russia, clearly drawing a line in the sand and the loyalties of the Solomons when this really begins to escalate. We'll move on to have a look at mentions of Australia, and it appears multiple times, the first of which is in the following paragraph. In the wake of the switch, Japan, the US and Australia immediately sent out representatives to potential development sites in Maelita, such as Bina Harbour, and announced that they will be more than capable of building a new international seaport at the site or in delivering other large projects for the province, and that they could do so either directly through the DCGA or indirectly through NGOs or not-for-profit organizations such as Windrock as surrogates of AusAid. To some Western powers, it matters not whether the legal requirements of tiny island nations are complied with or not. So even when appropriate government-to-government agreements had yet to be concluded, the US and its allies had gone ahead and given encouraging signals to the province that they would be reliable partners in times of need. The next time Australia is mentioned is in the following paragraph, and this reads, boasted by the existence of United States military bases in South Korea, Okinawa, mainland Japan, the Philippines, Guam, Marshall Islands, and Australia, besides others, which are literally at the doorstep of China, the collective West is emboldened to attack the PRC. By reducing its forces in the Middle East and Central Asia, the US is now turning its full attention to the pivot to Asia policy, which has been losing momentum in recent years, whilst China's influence in its own region has been growing significantly. To make the pivot to Asia substantive and meaningful, however, the US under President Biden has enlisted the cooperation and services of some NATO member countries and some Indo-Pacific nations that have formed themselves into the Quad, comprising Australia, India, Japan, and the US, and more recently AUKUS with Australia, UK, and US, not to mention the Five Eyes to confront China. The concluding paragraph of this article reads: Solomon Islands has become a hotspot in the geopolitical battle between China and the West in the Indo-Pacific region. A lot of troubling developments in the South China Sea, Taiwan, and the South Pacific can lead to a confrontation between the superpowers. China's presence in the Solomons is a constant irritation to Pacific's big powers. Therefore, Mara's resistance against China would sit well with their agenda. I would contend that if the Western powers continue to be given a strong foothold in Mailita by the Mara leadership, because all of them still like Taiwan to be in the country, Solomon Islands and China will have an existential challenge in their hands. There is a bunch of empirical evidence to suggest that typically Western powers would not balk at their own hypocrisy or double standard in the execution of their foreign policies, as long as they can achieve the maintenance of their hegemony over the Pacific countries. That is what matters. On the other hand, the PRC has stated categorically she is in the country to stay, and any attempt to undermine her welcome and duly lawful presence in the Solomons or the Pacific Islands will fail. Because of its strategic location in the Western Pacific, Solomon Islands must navigate carefully through the issues that are likely to ignite conflict between adversaries so as not to incur any likely collateral damage that may be sustained from a possible kinetic war between the two superpowers. For a bit of background information about the author, Warren Paya, this was the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, former advisor to a number of prime ministers, student of international relations at the ANU, with a number of accompanying qualifications ranging from MBAs, political science, through to history and economics. We move along to the next piece. Published on the 4th of January as well, in the section Viewpoint. This headline reads, despite US-India 2+2 dialogue, the relationship won't go too deep, by the author Long Sing Chun. The opening paragraph: the US and India will hold the 4th round of 2+2 foreign and defense ministers meetings in the 3rd week of January in Washington, D.C., according to Indian media. This mechanism started in 2018, focusing on bilateral diplomatic policies, national defense, and strategic affairs. All 4 members of the Quad have developed a 2+2 mechanism. A closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like it appears twice. The first of which is in the following paragraph. And just to provide a bit of context, what comes before is in Asia. South Korea mainly relies on the US with a focus on North Korea, but China is South Korea's largest trading partner. And without support from China, the Korean peninsula can hardly realize peaceful reunification. If Seoul takes Washington's side to contain Beijing, it will put itself in danger in terms of both economy and security. Getting along with both China and the US is optimal for South Korea in terms of its interests, so Washington cannot expect too much from Seoul. In the meantime, ASEAN is clearly aware that a China-US strategic confrontation would divide Asia and marginalize ASEAN in Asia-Pacific affairs, so the bloc has repeatedly vowed not to take sides between the two countries. Only Japan and Australia follow suit, but their subservience is not enough for the US to besiege China. This being the case, the Trump administration put forward an Indo-Pacific strategy and took advantage of the Quad to contain China. The Biden administration has continued this Indo-Pacific strategy and elevated the Quad dialogues into summits. The next mention of Australia appears in the following paragraph. Third, India hopes to use the US to balance China. However, the US is planning to make India a footman, having them fully participate in its containment of China while keeping distance from Russia. The problem is, India's pursuit to achieve a major power status determines that it will not act as a pawn like Japan or Australia. The recent summit between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin, and a first ever 2+2 meeting between Russia and India, signaled India's answer of no to the US. Washington should also be aware of New Delhi's intent to take advantage rather than being taken advantage of. No other mentions of Australia is found in this article, and just to wrap it up, here is the concluding paragraph. From a global perspective, China and India hold more common grounds than India and the US in terms of building new political and economic world order, promoting the democratization of international relations, and dealing with climate change. The US cannot accept a strong China, but is it willing to see a strong India? Background on the author: a senior research fellow with the Academy of Regional and Global Governance at the Beijing Foreign Studies University. He was also president of the Chengdu Institute of World Affairs. Moving along to the next instance of Australia covered in the Global Times, and this next piece is published on the 5th of January 2022 by Liu Xin and Zhang Changyue. The headline reads, Japan-Australia Defense Security Treaty will inflame regional tensions. China warns of countermeasures if bottom line touched. Opening paragraph reads, Australia and Japan will sign a historic treaty to deepen defense and security cooperation, a move that hypes the China threat and helps the US rope in military alliances to make NATO in the Pacific region to contain China. Analysts said the Pacific Ocean should not become the ocean for some countries to make waves, and any attempt to bring harm to China's territory will meet with firm countermeasures. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that Japan and Australia are set to sign the Reciprocal Access Agreement, the RAA, which will, for the first time, set out a framework to beef up defense and security cooperation at a virtual summit between him and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Thursday, Reuters repeated on Wednesday. There are multiple instances of Australia mentioned in the article, and looks like in numbers close to the 50s. Just to wrap up the article, we'll have a look at the concluding paragraph. Song noted that the US, Australia, and Japan are taking a chance that no matter how much trouble they've made, no attack would be brought to their own territory, which is totally wrong. Song said they should know that if they touch China's bottom line, either on the question of the island of Taiwan or bring harm to China's territory, countermeasures will follow. Drawing a pretty strong line in the sand, I might make the argument that this would sit clearly as a form of evidence confirming the Global Times taking part in othering as discursive practice. Moving along to the next piece, And this was published on the 5th of January, originally in the AFP. And the headline reads, Foreign Stars and Tongue Twisters as Japan Rugby Chases Global Appeal. Appearing in the sports section of the Global Times, we'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia. And it looks like mentions of Australia relate to the sports persons who are involved in the space. Doesn't seem to contain a strong political edge to it. There might be a subtle reference over here with a former Australian Rugby League international arrested on drug charges. And the rest of it seems to be information that are purely functional in nature. Neutral, or somewhat positive, one might say. We'll move along to the next piece. And this one relates to Hong Kong, published on the 5th of January by Leng Shumei at 4:09 p.m. in the Global Times. And this was found in the Society section of the paper. And the headline reads, Hong Kong imposes new restrictions banning flights amid Omicron resurgence. The opening paragraph reads, Hong Kong would ban flights from 8 countries starting Saturday as part of its enhanced anti-epidemic measures to prevent a potential 5th wave epidemic caused by Omicron. Experts said the measures were excessively strict, but very likely to succeed or snuff out a potential outbreak in as soon as 2 weeks, as the regional government is actively promoting the reopening of the border between Hong Kong and the mainland. Flights from 8 countries, including Australia, Canada, and France, will be banned from Saturday for 2 weeks to prevent infections caused by the Omicron variant. A chief executive of Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region, Carrie Lam, said on Wednesday. Further mentions of Australia. There do not appear to be any. And just to wrap up the article, we'll have a close look at the concluding paragraph. Hong Kong authorities approved the application of Sinovac vaccine for children aged 3 to 17, but priority is given to those aged 12 to 17. We'll move along to the next piece. This was published on the 5th of January in the Society column of the Global Times, and the headline reads, Chinese researchers review details of mutations of Omicron BA.2 lineage. Opening paragraph states, Chinese researchers reviewed the details of the mutations of the BA.2 lineage of the Omicron variant after studying the country's first imported case of the lineage in South China's Guangdong province. Having a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears once in the following paragraph. The article said, compared with the Wuhan reference sequence, the strain from this case displayed 67 nucleotide variation sites. The sequence reported on the evolutionary branch is most similar to that reported in Singapore on December 20th, 2021, and Australia on December 1st, 2021. Looks like the mention of Australia is purely functional over here in this case, and we'll move along to the next article. Firms reap benefits of RECP. Published on the 6th of January, this headline reads, RCEP starts to deliver benefits for enterprises and business leaders. This was found in the economy section of the Global Times. Trade Pact helps cut costs, boosts regional integration, according to business leaders. The opening paragraph reads, effective implementation of the world's largest free trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, has already helped enterprises save $220,000 on tariffs as of Wednesday, a senior Chinese trade official said on Thursday, while underscoring the massive benefits of the Trade Pact for regional and global industries. Since the RCEP officially came into force on January the 1st, the China Council of the Promotion of International Trade, known as the CCPIT, issued 275 RCEP certificates of origin for 135 Chinese enterprises from 18 provinces and municipalities as of Wednesday, which are expected to reduce tariff payments by $220,000, said Gao Yan, chairperson of the CCPIT. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like appears for the first time in this paragraph, addressing the RCEP Business Leaders Forum in Nanning, South China's Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region. Gao noted that these certificates mainly covered textiles, chemicals, medical products, and food, and the export destinations included Japan, Australia, and other member countries with an export value of more than $19 million. Under the RCEP, more than 90% of merchandise trade amongst members will eventually be subject to zero tariffs. The agreement includes 10 ASEAN member states, as well as China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. The 15 states' total population, GDP, and trade each account for about 30% of the world total. The third and final mention of Australia in this article reads, as the agreement takes place, tariffs on more than 65% of China's trade in goods with ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand are expected to immediately reach zero. Arguably a reference to Australia with a positive light in this case, as we move along to the next piece, which takes a close look at Xinjiang. This was published in the economy section of the paper, and the headline reads, the US shouldn't turn a blind eye to Xinjiang's social economic achievements, according to the foreign minister. The US shouldn't turn a blind eye to Xinjiang's social and economic achievements, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said on Thursday, hitting back at criticism that targets Tesla's new showroom in Xinjiang. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like here's once, somewhere in the middle of the article, and it reads, media outlets and scholars from a number of countries including France, Russia, Sweden, the US, Japan, and Australia have published articles explaining that the so-called forced labor and genocide in Xinjiang are utter lies, made up by the US on the basis of China-targeted prejudice and hostility, the spokesperson said. No further mentions of Australia is found in this article, and it really looks like an interesting use of Australia in this instance, making use of Australia as a proxy to support a positive representation of China. Not quite a clear form of othering offensive. This one is far more subtle. Moving along to the next article, as there are no further mentions of Australia over here. The next piece comes in the sporting section of the Global Times, and the headline reads, Managing Director Giles warns against England clear-out after Ashes rout. Originally published by the AFP, the opening paragraph reads, England Managing Director Ashley Giles has said he absolutely felt the responsibility of an Ashes series loss in Australia, but insisted a mass clear-out of the senior leadership would merely mask underlying problems. A scan of mentions of Australia reveals that it appears a number of times, and it looks like references to it were purely functional in nature. Moving along to the next piece. This next article was originally published in Xinhua, and it's made up of a bunch of photos, and the headline reads, Malaysia's durians other agricultural exports to see boost under RCEP trade agreements. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Malaysia's agricultural exports, including its much sought-after durians, would greatly benefit from the rolling out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, industry experts said. A closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears twice in the same paragraph. In this paragraph, it reads, quote, the signing and future of RCEP would undoubtedly bring benefits and development opportunities. Among the members of the agreements, ASEAN, China, Japan, and Australia are all important agricultural countries, and there is a huge space for the development of the agricultural economy and trade cooperation between Malaysia and China, ASEAN, Japan, and Australia, unquote. And to provide context, the quote was provided by Edwin Chiang, Secretary General of the Malaysia International Durian Industry Development Association, who mentioned this to Xinhua in a recent interview. No further mentions of Australia in the article. Moving along to the next piece, also published on the 6th of January. This was found in the Society section of the Global Times, and the headline reads, Luxury brand Nola Atelier, I hope I'm getting the pronunciation correct and probably not, removes wrong Tibetan Plateau location listing on websites after drawing ire from Chinese netizens. Let's take a closer look at the article. Nola Atelier, a luxury brand founded by a Tibetan American featuring hand-woven, sustainable yak fur products, has faced sharp criticism in China for listing out stores located in the Tibetan Plateau, including the provinces of Gansu, Yunnan, and Tibet Autonomous Region, separately with stores in the rest of the country. The Global Times found on Wednesday morning that the official website of Norla, its stores against the world, were divided based on geographical location into categories, namely Europe, Tibetan Plateau, China, Japan, and online. Under the subcategory of Tibetan Plateau, it listed flagship stores in northwest China's Gansu province and southwest China's Yunnan province and the Tibet Autonomous Region, while under the subcategory of China, there are only a few cities, including Beijing and Shanghai. Taking a closer look at the mention of Australia, and it appears somewhere in the middle of, closer towards the end of the article, and this is what it reads. The brand was awarded Best of the World by B Corp certification, conferred by a global non-profit organization with offices in the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, as recognition for being part of the top 10 percentile of companies which makes the greatest community impact in the world. No other mentions of Australia is found in this article. Moving along to the next piece, which was published on the 7th of January by Wang Qi at 7:57 p.m. in the Global Times. This was found in the diplomacy section, and the headline reads, Japan deepens defense ties with the US to target China, seeking to justify amending the war-renouncing constitution. The opening paragraph reads, aiming to deepen defense cooperation, the US and Japan on Friday held a virtual 2+2 meeting with a new 5-year agreement on sharing the cost of US military presence in Japan signed. Experts said that Kishida Fumio's cabinet, under pressure from the country's domestic right force, and US Joe Biden's administration has itself heading in a dangerous direction as the US-Japan alliance has become increasingly weak and foolishly isolated in the Indo-Pacific region. We'll take a look at mentions of Australia, and it does show up a number of times, the first of which is in the following paragraph. The 2+2 meeting came one day after the signing of a new agreement between Japan and Australia, another US vassal state in the Asia-Pacific region. The reciprocal access agreement, Japan's first with any country, will enable Australia and Japan's militaries to work more closely on defense-related matters. Wang urged the US, Japan, and Australia to earnestly fulfill their due international responsibilities. China urges the US, UK, and Australia to stop the nuclear submarines project, stop pushing for Fukushima nuclear contaminated water to be released into the Pacific, stop denying and beautifying historical militarist aggression, and stop stirring up regional division, Wang said. During the meeting, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also managed enough time to hype up the threats North Korea and Russia pose to a free and open Indo-Pacific. The concluding paragraph of this article reads, "If Japan becomes involved in a war with China, then China's imminent counterattack will be unbearable and fatal for Japan," Liu said. Japan does not dare say that its alliance with the US is no longer important, but developing joint combat capabilities with the US increases its own risks, Liu added. We'll move along to the next piece. Published on the 7th of January, in the economy section of the Global Times, the headline reads, "RCEP welcomes rising deals in first week as firms delighted with cost benefits." The opening paragraph states, "A wave of initial deals swept across China's exporting provinces in the first week of implementation of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Pact, as companies across China are thrilled at the tangible RCEP benefits." A closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears once, and it's in the following paragraph. Under the RCEP, more than 90% of merchandise trade amongst members will eventually be subject to zero tariffs. The agreement includes 10 ASEAN members as well as China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. The 15 states' total population, GDP, and trade account for 30% of global output. No further mentions of Australia, and the concluding paragraph of this article reads, China announced in November that it would strive to import $150 billion worth of goods from ASEAN in a 5-year period. Published on the 8th of January in the editorial section of the Global Times, this next headline reads, "Any outpost interfering in Taiwan question will be the PLA's target." Global Times editorial. The opening paragraph of this article reads, "Foreign and defense ministers of the US and Japan held a virtual 2+2 meeting on Friday. They hyped the so-called threat from China and declared that they resolved to work together to deter and, if necessary, respond to destabilizing activities in the region. Their joint statement reiterated that the US-Japan Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security applies to the Diaoyu Islands, and also mentioned questions relating to Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, the East China Sea, and the South China Sea, almost repeating all the anti-China cliches. The US-Japan 2+2 meeting is not only lip service, the two countries have conspired to take some direct actions against China, which is a threat to regional security." Mentions of Australia, and it looks like it appears multiple times, in excess of 20. And let's take a closer look at the first appearance of Australia. Now this comes in close to maybe paragraph 8 or 9 of the article, and it reads, however, as long as the DPP authority still wants to seek succession and Taiwan secessionist forces are still ready to move, the Chinese mainland will not renounce the last resort of reunification by force. This is also the steel ceiling to curb Taiwan secessionists from taking chances. Now the US has brought along Japan, Australia and other followers trying to drill a hole in the ceiling to let the DPP authority breathe. They want to use a glimmer of hope to tempt the DPP authority to continue to act as a strategic pawn. However, every time the US and Japan emboldens the DPP authority and Taiwan secessionists, the mainland will double their risks. It will not take many rounds to crush Taiwan secessionists and drag down external intervention forces. The next mention of Australia appears in I may have made a mistake. It looks like there's just a single mention of Australia in this article. And just to round things up, the concluding paragraph of this article reads, the US and its allies think that by using diplomatic rhetoric and tricks to differentiate and rope in others, that they can benefit from the Taiwan question. But facts will eventually prove that this will only backfire. The Taiwan Straits is not a place where the US and its allies can craft a publicity stunt. The deeper they are involved, the greater the price they will pay in the end. No further mentions of Australia as we move along to the next piece. Published on the 9th of January. The headline reads, Xinjiang cotton sees a bumper year with higher yields. Income for farmers despite US crackdown. This was found in the economy section of the Global Times, and the opening paragraph reads, the cotton harvest from more than 13 million mu, or 2 million hectares of land has been acquired in northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region as the buying season is drawing to a close, with higher crop yields and incomes for cotton farmers indicating a prosperous industry despite slander and a crackdown by the US. Australia is mentioned once in this article, and it reads, total demand for cotton in China is about 7.8 million tons, with about 1.85 million tons relying on imports mainly from India, Australia and other countries, read a report released by the CCTA in December. A functional reference to Australia in this case. As we move along to the next piece, which was published also on the 9th of January in the companies section of the Global Times. The headline reads, traditional Chinese medicine maker expands amid rising overseas demand during the pandemic. The opening paragraph reads, a traditional Chinese medicine TCM maker has been accelerating its overseas registration process and expansion plans in response to booming global demand and the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Despite lingering difficulties in getting approval in countries such as the US and Australia, the number of overseas approvals issued for TCM such as Lianhua Qingwen has quadrupled since the pandemic, industry insiders said, a clear indication of TCM gaining wider acceptance overseas. Australia is mentioned a number of times in this article, and the next time it appears is in this paragraph. And this reads, rising demand for the medicine has come from some parts of Australia where local residents and students, mostly Chinese, are moving the stockpile Lianhua Qingwen, which has played a role in the prevention and control of the epidemic amid the rising severity of the virus infections, the Global Times learned. The other mention of Australia appears here, and the paragraph reads, the logistics hurdle means it takes us about a week to get the medicine with higher costs, but we're willing to pay all the costs given the rising severity of the situation in Australia, Charles said. An international student based in Melbourne who asked to remain anonymous told the Global Times on Sunday that she has seen people asking to buy the medicine and more friends are infected recently compared with 2021 and 2022 and 2020. Other students said that she stocked up on TCM and carried it from China to Australia in 2020. I feel safer with some Chinese medicine on hand, she said. While there is booming demand for TCM during the pandemic, Lianhua Qingwen is still regarded as unapproved in some countries such as Australia, as it lacks the required clinical validation, according to media reports. Some express delivery companies said that Lianhua Qingwen capsules or granules sent from China to Australia can be shipped by sea or air, but they are labeled as sensitive goods, so they may be returned, a social media account on Sina Weibo said on Saturday. Lianhua Qingwen is not yet registered or approved for sale in the US or Australia because of a series of clinical trials need to be completed. A source with Chinese drug producer Shijiazhuang Yiling Pharmaceutical, the supplier of Lianhua Qingwen, told the Global Times on Sunday, noting that this process usually takes many years. We'll move along to the next article, and one might make the argument that this does draw a line in the sand, a bit of a more subtle one. But arguably, this does paint Australia in a negative light. We keep going to the next piece, and this one is entitled NBR Special Report on China Reveals Division of US Allies in Asia Pacific. The headline reads, NBR Special Report on China Reveals Division of US Allies in the Asia Pacific, and this was found in the Observer section of the Global Times. The opening paragraph reads, US think tank, the National Bureau of Asian Research, NBR, released a special report on Friday. This report, entitled Meeting China's Military Challenge, Collective Responses of US Allies and Partners, gathered opinions of experts and 6 US allies and partners in the Asia-Pacific region: Japan, Australia, India, the Philippines, Vietnam, and the island of Taiwan, on how to deal with China's military challenge. At first, this NBR special report looks no different to similar reports released by other US think tanks. It does nothing more than to hype the China threat theory and call for containing China. But the 6 US allies and partners are not chosen randomly. They are either countries and regions within the first island chain that are feeling the increasing threat of China, or those beyond the first island chain that are increasingly vulnerable to Chinese coercion. With a clear bias to provoke hostility towards China, this is probably what makes the report so special. According to NBR's website, the second largest funding of the organization comes from the US government, amounting to 16%. A closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears in the following paragraph. The deeper reason is that each of these 6 allies and partners has its own interests, despite all of them needing Washington's helping hand somehow. According to Song, Japan wants to maintain its position as the leader in Asia. At the same time, it also wants the US to help it protect what Japan calls the Senkaku Islands. It is known otherwise as the Diaoyu Islands, which is part of China's territory, and maintain the median line between China and Japan in the East China Sea. Australia is more interested in becoming a world power to maintain regional order, while India is hoping to gain a more beneficial position over the China-India border disputes. The Philippines and Vietnam aim to use external forces to contain the threat from China in the South China Sea. There are no further mentions of Australia in this article, and just to wrap things up, the concluding paragraph of this piece states, facts have proven that the US is capable of doing that. Just look at what happened in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Washington will abandon its allies and partners when they appear to be no longer of use, Commander Song. This is the embodiment of quote-unquote America First. Published on the 9th of January, this next headline appeared in the sports section of the Global Times. Record equaling Rahm ties Smith for PGA Tournament of Champions lead. The piece was originally published in the AFP, and the opening paragraph states, World number 1 Rahm fired a course record equaling 12 under par 61 to grab a share of the third round lead alongside Cameron Smith in the USPGA Tour Tournament of Champions on Saturday. Mentions of Australia appear once. He finally caught Australia Smith on the final hole, Smith posting a 9 under par 64 as the leading duo finished 54 holes on 26 under 193. Second mention of Australia relates to the Australian Matt Jones firing a 62 to head the group, and looks like mentions of Australia over here are purely functional in nature. We'll keep going to the next piece, and this will be the final reference to Australia from the Global Times for the week starting from Monday the 3rd of January through to Sunday the 9th of January. Found in the opinion section of the Global Times, this headline reads, Milan drills to be less serious than India expects. The opening paragraph reads, Indian media outlet The Financial Express reported earlier this month that the Indian Navy is getting ready for the largest ever multilateral Milan exercise, scheduled for the end of February, with 46 navies across the globe expected to enter the Indian waters. Both India and like-minded navies are getting together to find ways to counter the growing presence of China, a senior Indian officer explained, according to the report. Taking a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears for the first time in the following paragraph. India's main purpose is to invite AUKUS and Quad members to strengthen its capabilities for maritime operations. The US, the UK, Japan, and Australia are the so-called core players of this exercise. They may practice some traditional exercises with the Indian Navy, such as joint anti-submarine operations. Advanced warships, including US aircraft carriers, may integrate with the Indian Navy to launch joint anti-submarine operations with the Indian Ocean, serving as an imaginary battlefield. This was also a major part of the previous Malabar exercise. Anti-submarine operations could still be major components this time, especially in an in-depth military exercise between India and the 4 other countries. The next mention of Australia relates to the Malabar exercise, and the paragraph reads, the Milan exercise will not be as serious as the Malabar exercise. The Malabar exercise is a targeted multilateral anti-submarine military exercise amongst India, Australia, the US, and Japan. Many weapons and equipment systems are interconnected amongst these countries, and there may be a deep integration of military forces as well as the sharing of intelligence. Throughout the Milan exercise, there may also be anti-submarine exercises, but they will not be as professional as those conducted in Malabar. The final mention of Australia comes in the following paragraph, and it states, but most countries will not blindly follow India. Countries in the Middle East and Africa will simply participate in this exercise, but they are unlikely to join hands with India to block and contain China at sea. However, other countries like Japan, the US, the UK, and Australia may use India to build a large C-shaped encirclement against China in a wider area, which includes relevant waters of both the Western Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. Therefore, the US and India may have some common interests in jointly containing China's maritime power. There are no further mentions of Australia in this article, and just to wrap things up, the concluding paragraph of the article reads, however, India is not a true ally of the US. The two sides will engage in military cooperation on the basis of mutual utilization with a sense of suspicion. Therefore, India's defense cooperation with the US and US allies is loose and lacks sincerity. And this comes from a Beijing-based military analyst named Wei Dongxi. This concludes our look at representations of Australia stemming from the Global Times. 21 articles in total. And now we head over to Sky News Australia's and we'll take a closer look at what they have to say about China. As mentioned earlier in this podcast, I had some issues tallying up the publications from the previous week of 27th to December to the 2nd of January because the last time I looked, there were 0 instances of China being mentioned from Australia, which was a bit of a surprise. It may have been an issue with the search engine not uncovering the content I was looking for, but it looks like there were at least 2 articles from the week of 27th of December to the 2nd of January, and they'll make up one of the 9 articles I'll be looking at from Sky News Australia today. The first piece that I'd like to look at from Sky News Australia was published on December 23rd, and the headline reads, "Millions of people ordered into lockdown in China." My apologies for that. The article should have been China records 200 new COVID cases. So published on the 27th of December. I'm not sure how I managed to miss it. I do apologize for that, and I'll need to make the necessary changes in the YouTube video description. So this piece comes with an accompanying video, 46 seconds in duration, and the headline reads, "China records 200 new COVID cases." China has reported 200 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, a reduction from 206 a day earlier. Of the new infections, 162 were locally transmitted compared with 158 a day earlier. Having a look at the rest of the article, it looks like it's performing a purely functional role, reporting on the data, which brings us then to the next piece, which was published during the week of 27th of December through to the 2nd of January 2022. And this piece reads, in the headline, "China files complaint against Elon Musk," published on the 30th of December 2021. China has launched an official complaint about billionaire Elon Musk, claiming they have now had 2 close encounters with his SpaceX satellites. The country's gone to the UN Space Agency, angry its space station was forced to avoid collisions with Musk's Starlink internet satellites. Mr. Musk was immediately blasted by Chinese web users, with at least one calling Musk's satellite space junk. This article comes with an accompanying video, 26 seconds in duration. In this instance, not exactly painting China in a negative light directly, but one that is a lot more subtle. We'll move along to the next piece, and starting from this moment, we will be looking at articles published from the 3rd of January to the 9th of January 2022. The first piece that's coming in during this time frame, my deepest apologies, I seem to have made another error in relation to the number of articles that were published during the prior week of 27th of December to the 2nd of January. The next piece, which was headlined by "Beijing lashes out Australia over Morrison's TikTok account," and that was published on the 30th of December as well. Double standards, China berates PM over TikTok use, published on the 30th of December. So it looks like the tally is 4 from that week. And if I can, I'd like to go through the first of the ones that I've missed from the week, running from Monday the 27th of December through to Sunday the 2nd of January. So this headline, published on the 30th of December 2021, reads, Double Standards, China Berates PM over TikTok Use. It looks like it's appearing with an accompanying video, 51 seconds in duration. And it reads, Beijing has accused Australia of having double standards after Prime Minister Scott Morrison created an account on Chinese-owned social media app TikTok. The PM voiced security concerns about the app last year, saying its extension cord goes back to the country. Mr. Morrison also created an account on Christmas Eve to wish Australians well for the festive season. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson says Australia should provide a fair and non-discriminatory environment for Chinese companies. Moving along to the next article, and this was published on the 30th of December as well, with the headline, China accuses Australia of double standards over Prime Minister Scott Morrison's new TikTok account. Scott Morrison's debut on TikTok was not well received by Beijing, who accused the leader of practicing double standards after the Prime Minister raised security concerns over the Chinese app last year. Beijing has lashed Australia for practicing double standards after Prime Minister Scott Morrison created an account on Chinese-owned social media platform TikTok, despite airing national security concerns about the app last year. Zhao Lijian, spokesperson for China's Foreign Ministry, said while the use of online apps by certain Australian politicians was his own business, he wanted to stress Canberra should be committed to providing a fair and non-discriminatory market environment. What I want to reiterate is that Australia should uphold the principle of openness in market rules, stop abusing the concept of national security, stop double standards of selective use of rules, and provide a fair, open and non-discriminatory business environment for Chinese enterprises, he said. China's accusation was prompted by the Prime Minister's new TikTok account, which he set up on Christmas Eve to wish Australians well in the holiday season. We'll move along to the next article, which was published on the 3rd of January. And now I think we are up to date. So 4 instances of China being mentioned in Sky News Australia for the previous week. And this would be the first of Australia being mentioned. China being mentioned, apologies for that, in relation to Sky News Australia for the week of 3rd of January, Monday 2022 to Sunday the 9th of January. This headline reads, China's elephant population grows. It comes with an accompanying video 2 minutes and 49 seconds in duration. And the opening line states, a herd of Chinese elephants has become famous around the world after leaving its nature reserve and wandering for hundreds of kilometers. However, environmentalists have warned the animals are causing more damage as their numbers grow. We'll move along to the next article that's emerged from the Sky News Australia paper, or website, apologies. And this headline reads, Permanent UN Security Council members China, US, UK, France and Russia issue rare joint anti-nuclear weapons statement. The permanent members of the UN Security Council have issued a joint statement pledging to avoid nuclear war which cannot be won and must never be fought. It comes with an accompanying video, 46 seconds in duration, and the opening paragraph reads, the United States, United Kingdom, China, France and Russia have released a rare joint statement confirming their commitment to avoiding nuclear warfare. The 5 countries who are the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council admitted the prospect of nuclear war would result in far-reaching consequences. We'll have a closer look at mentions of China in this article, and looks like it appears multiple times. The next time it appears is in the following paragraph. the US, China, France, and Russia further agreed to continue working towards creating an environment which will allow for progress with disarmament with the ultimate goal of a world without nuclear weapons. Moving along to the next piece, and this was published on the 5th of January. The headline reads, China's city of Yuzhou ordered into lockdown. China is continuing to pursue its goal of zero COVID infections, ordering a second city into lockdown and creating a Winter Olympics bubble. The video comes with an accompanying video. The article comes with an accompanying video, 48 seconds in duration. The rest of the article reads, stay-at-home orders have been imposed on more than 1 million people in Yuzhou after 3 asymptomatic cases were detected. People are being told to remain indoors while the transport system and non-essential shops have been closed. The strict measures also remained in the city of Xi'an, where residents have been confined to their homes since December 23rd. Published on the 6th of January, this next piece is entitled China Orders Residents to Undergo COVID Test. It's accompanied by a 4-minute and 28-second long video, and its opening paragraph reads, China's city of Zhengzhou has ordered its population of nearly 13 million to undergo a COVID test after several infections were detected. Residents have been living under a partial lockdown for the past fortnight. China has ramped up COVID measures to stamp out the virus ahead of the Winter Olympics and the Lunar New Year. This next piece was published on the 6th of January, and its headline reads, China lockdowns could hardly be stricter. It comes with an accompanying video, 7 minutes and 9 seconds in duration, and its opening line reads, the Australian's North Asia correspondent Will Glasgow said lockdown measures in China could hardly be stricter. What's happening in Xi'an, a city of 13 million, is just on another planet, Mr. Glasgow told Sky News Australia. They're not allowed to leave their home at all. They're reliant on government deliveries of food. That concludes our look at representations of China from Sky News Australia. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Australia China Media Watch podcast. Your attention has been greatly appreciated. If you've got the time and the bandwidth to do so, please don't forget to subscribe or leave a like, and even better, make a comment to help this podcast improve. By and large, over the first 10 episodes, this is an attempt to fine-tune the concept, and once we reach the 10th episode, I'll be looking at a change towards the format to present the information in a far more expedient way. Until then, I'm looking forward to hear from you. This is the Australia China Media Watch podcast, signing off for the week. Catch you back here for episode number 9. Thank you so much indeed.